Welcome to Night Ward Echo, a place where the night never sleeps and every echo carries a story you were never meant to hear. Tonight, we bring you 10 creepiest night shift horror stories from Texas. Stories from late-night gas stations, empty highways, silent hospitals, and lonely motels where the dark hours stretch longer than the day. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? And don't forget to subscribe, because once the night shift begins, there's no clocking out. I used to work the overnight shift at a small gas station off Highway 42 in rural Texas. It wasn't much. 2 pumps, a tiny store that smelled like old coffee, and a parking lot lit by a single flickering lamp. We didn't get a lot of traffic after midnight. Mostly long-haul truckers and the occasional college kid passing through. I took the job because I needed the money and didn't mind being alone. I'd usually bring my earbuds, make a fresh pot of coffee, and kill time scrolling on my phone. I thought it would be easy, until what happened that winter. It started on a Tuesday night in early December. I came in at 11 p.m. for my shift. My coworker, Denise, was finishing hers. As she handed me the keys, she said something that stuck with me. "Hey, keep an eye on pump 3 tonight." Guy was just standing there for like 10 minutes, not even filling up. I asked her what she meant. She shrugged. Just some weird guy in a black hoodie. Didn't buy anything, didn't leave. Gave me the creeps. I laughed it off, figuring it was just a drifter or someone stretching their legs. But around 2 a.m., I glanced out the front window and there he was. A man in a dark hoodie stood at pump 3, facing the pump, perfectly still. The hood was pulled low over his face and his hands hung at his sides. I figured he was just tired or maybe drunk. I watched him for a while. He didn't move. Finally, I picked up the intercom and said, "Hey, you good out there?" He didn't respond. A cold draft blew in when I opened the door and stepped outside. The man didn't look up, didn't acknowledge me at all. "Sir, you need help?" I called out. Nothing. I walked a little closer, maybe 10 feet away, and that's when I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. There was no car at the pump, just him. Standing there, I hesitated, suddenly unsure what to do. I could see the condensation of my own breath in the cold night air, but nothing from him. I got the overwhelming feeling I shouldn't get any closer. I retreated back inside and locked the door. I told myself it was just some drugged-up hitchhiker. Maybe if I ignored him, he'd leave. But when I checked again a few minutes later, he was gone. I didn't see him leave. No car had pulled in or out. I scanned the cameras, rewinding the footage. The pumps showed nothing but empty pavement the whole time. No man, no shadow. I thought maybe the camera angle missed him. But I knew what I'd seen. I barely slept after my shift. The next night, I came in hoping it had all been in my head. It wasn't. At around 1:30 a.m., I saw him again, standing at the same pump, facing it, as if staring into it. The same black hoodie, the same stillness. This time I didn't go outside. I just watched him through the glass for nearly half an hour. He never moved an inch. Then a truck pulled in to fill up at pump 1. As soon as the headlights washed over the lot, the man in the hoodie wasn't there anymore. The truck driver came inside to pay. I asked if he saw the guy at pump 3. He looked at me like I was crazy. "There's nobody out there, kid." When I checked the cameras later again, nothing. I started dreading my shifts. Denise noticed I was quieter than usual. I didn't tell her what I was seeing because I didn't want to sound insane. The third night was the worst. It was around 3 a.m. when I saw the man again. This time, he wasn't at the pump. He was closer, standing under the flickering parking lot light, just a few feet from the store's entrance. I couldn't see his face under the hood, but I swear I felt his eyes on me. I tried calling the sheriff's department. The deputy who answered sounded tired. "There's nobody out there," he said after checking the lot on their drive-by camera. "Probably your imagination." I stayed behind the counter all night, clutching the baseball bat we kept under the register. By morning, when Denise came in, I felt like I'd aged a year. She gave me a weird look. "You okay? You look pale." I told her I hadn't slept much. I didn't tell her that I'd seen the man slowly tilt his head to one side, as if curious, before vanishing right in front of my eyes. I was ready to quit by the 4th night, but I needed the paycheck. The shift started quietly. Midnight passed. 1 a.m. passed. I started to think maybe it was over. Then at 2:37 a.m., the lights in the store flickered. I looked up and saw the man in the hoodie standing inside the store. near the snack aisle. I dropped the coffee pot I was holding. It shattered on the floor. My heart pounded as I backed toward the door, my hand fumbling for the bat. "Who are you?" I shouted. He didn't answer. He just stood there, head tilted, that same motionless stance. I could see his outline, but his face was just blank. Like there was nothing there. The overhead lights flickered again, bound, and he was gone. I ran outside into the freezing air and didn't go back in until sunrise. When I checked the cameras later, the aisle where I'd seen him was empty the entire time. The next day I quit. I didn't even go back for my last paycheck. I've driven past that gas station a few times since. Sometimes, late at night, I'll glance toward the pumps. Once, I thought I saw a figure standing at pump 3 again, but I didn't slow down to check, I just kept driving. I've learned that some places, and maybe some people, just stay, even when they shouldn't. I got my nursing license in 2019 and spent most of my early career doing day shifts at a small clinic. Last winter, though, I moved to a rural part of Texas after my fiance got a job with the county. The local hospital, Cedar Hollow Regional, needed night nurses. I figured it would be quieter than the daytime hustle I was used to. I was wrong. Cedar Hollow isn't big. 3 floors, maybe 70 beds total. The ER and ICU are on the first floor, long-term patients on the second. The third floor has a few surgical recovery rooms and a locked wing that everyone just calls East Wing. They told me on my first night that the East Wing had been shut down for over a decade after a flood damaged the lower floors of that section. The repairs were never finished because the hospital didn't have the budget. The double doors were locked and sealed. I thought it was just another abandoned part of an old rural hospital. My first few shifts were pretty uneventful. Night work mostly meant checking vitals on patients who couldn't sleep, walking the halls to make sure nobody had fallen out of bed, and drinking too much coffee to keep from nodding off around 3 a.m. Then, about a week in, I heard it. It was around 2:15 in the morning. I was restocking gloves and syringes at the supply closet near the end of the second-floor hallway. The hallway outside was dead quiet. Then, under the faint hum of the fluorescent lights, I heard voices, not loud or distinct, just a murmur, like the low rumble of a conversation carried through a wall. I stopped and held my breath, listening harder. The sound was coming from the stairwell that led up to the third floor. When I went up to check, I expected to see one of the older nurses or maybe one of the security guys on his rounds. But the hallway was empty. The East Wing doors, those heavy locked double doors, were right at the end of the corridor. The voices seemed to come from behind them. I stood there for a long minute, straining to pick out words. I couldn't. It was just the steady, faint murmur of people talking. Then as I started walking toward the doors, it stopped, completely. I waited another minute, feeling ridiculous. Finally, I shrugged it off as an echo from the floors below. Old buildings do that. The next night, I mentioned it to Danny, the overnight security guard. He was in his late 50s, a retired sheriff's deputy with that dry humor you see in people who've seen too much. "Voices in the East Wing, huh?" he said, giving me a look. "You're not the first. Probably the pipes. That whole section's gutted. Don't go trying to check it out, though. Doors chained for a reason." I laughed it off. But the way he said it, not teasing, not quite serious, stuck with me. A few nights later, things escalated. It was just after 3 a.m., the dead hour when the whole building felt hollow. I was doing paperwork at the nurse's station. There were 2 other people on duty, Tanya, an older nurse who was dozing in the break room, and Mason, a new tech who was checking vitals on the second floor. That's when I heard the footsteps. Slow, uneven, like someone was limping. I looked up the hallway toward the stairwell. The sound was coming from above. I waited, expecting to see Mason come down, but no one appeared. I grabbed my small flashlight and went upstairs. The third floor was dim. We kept only a few lights on at night, and I could hear the footsteps more clearly as I reached the landing. They were coming from the East Wing again. I walked slowly down the hall. The air grew noticeably colder the closer I got to the locked doors. Then I heard it, the faint click of something metallic on the other side of the door, like a cartwheel turning, and then the murmur of voices again. 2, maybe 3 people. They sounded calm, like they were discussing something. I swallowed hard and took a step closer until I was right up against the doors. I leaned my ear against the cool metal. I caught a few words this time. A woman's voice, soft but urgent. "Not supposed to be here." And then a man's voice, lower, almost a growl. "No, hurry up, they'll come back." My heart was hammering. I don't scare easily, but there was something so wrong about hearing that conversation in a part of the hospital that had been locked and empty for years. I backed away and headed downstairs. I didn't tell Tanya or Mason. I didn't want to sound like I was losing it. 2 nights later, I was alone at the nurse's station again. Tanya had gone down to check on a patient. Mason was doing a supply run. I was scrolling through my phone when I heard the intercom click. That soft static pop you hear right before someone speaks over it, but no one spoke. I stared up at the small speaker over the doorway. The intercom stayed on for a good 5 seconds. Then I heard it. The faintest whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but it wasn't just static. It was the same soft, hushed tone I'd heard behind the East Wing doors. I stood frozen until the intercom clicked off. I finally told Tanya about it on my next shift. She sighed, looking more annoyed than concerned. "Hon, I've been working nights here for 18 years. You get tired, you hear things. I've heard the voices too. Everybody has. Don't let it get to you." That didn't make me feel better. It made me feel worse. The last night I worked at Cedar Hollow was the night I decided I couldn't handle it anymore. It was a Thursday, bitterly cold outside, with the wind rattling the old window frames. Around 2:30 a.m., Mason asked me to help him move some supplies from a storage closet on the 3rd floor. We figured we'd just get it over with together. We went up the stairs with a cart. As soon as we reached the landing, we both stopped. The hallway was colder than usual. Not just chilly, but like walking into a freezer. And the voices were back. Louder this time. Mason frowned at me. "You hear that too?" I nodded. My stomach dropped. We stood there listening. The voices weren't whispers anymore. They were arguing. We could hear the words clearly through the metal doors. "We can't let them find us. It's too late. Just keep quiet." Then came a sharp bang on the other side of the doors, like someone slamming a metal tray down. Mason swore under his breath. "I'm calling Danny." He pulled out his radio, but before he could press the button, we both heard it. Footsteps, not behind the doors. In the hallway with us, we spun around, but there was no one there. The footsteps grew louder, coming toward us from the far end of the corridor, steady, heavy, like boots on the tile floor. I felt a sudden, bone-deep dread. I grabbed Mason's sleeve. "Let's go." We backed down the stairs fast, the sound of the footsteps following us until we reached the 2nd floor. When we glanced back up, the landing was empty. Danny went up to check 15 minutes later. When he came back down, his face was pale. "There's nobody up there," he said. "And the doors are still chained. Both locks in place. That was my last shift at Cedar Hollow. I quit the next morning. It's been 3 months since then. I've taken a job at a clinic back in the city. I still think about that night. Sometimes I wonder if there really were people hiding in that abandoned wing. Maybe squatters or someone else who found a way in. But then I remember the footsteps in the hallway with us. The ones that stopped as soon as we fled. Or the whispers over the intercom. No one's supposed to be in the East Wing. But every night at Cedar Hollow, after 2 a.m., you can hear them talking. I've been a highway patrol officer in southern Nevada for almost 15 years. I've seen my share of wrecks, drunk drivers, and the occasional weird late-night call. But there's one night that's stuck with me ever since. I don't tell this story often, mostly because I still can't explain it. It happened about 3 years ago during the height of summer. I was on the midnight shift covering a long, lonely stretch of State Route 375, the so-called extraterrestrial highway. If you've ever driven it, you know how empty it feels. No lights, no towns for miles. Just desert, scrub, and the black outline of mountains on the horizon. The shift had been uneventful. I'd stopped one speeder and helped a trucker whose rig had overheated. Around 2:30 a.m., I was parked on the shoulder near mile marker 88, sipping coffee that had gone lukewarm, when I saw headlights cresting a rise up ahead. They didn't move like normal headlights. They slowed down, swerved gently onto the shoulder, then stopped. I figured the driver might be tired or having car trouble. So I started the cruiser, flipped on my hazard lights, and pulled up behind the vehicle. It was a silver Toyota Camry, late 2000s model. The taillights glowed faintly in the dark. The desert air was still and hot enough that the heat shimmered over the road. I approached from the driver's side, my flashlight cutting through the black. The first thing I noticed was that the car's engine was running. The second was that the driver's door was ajar. Only a few inches, but enough to notice. "Highway patrol." I called out as I reached the door. "You all right in there?" No response. I angled the flashlight inside. The seats were empty, no driver. No passenger. I frowned and opened the door wider. The car was still in park, keys in the ignition. The engine hummed quietly. The dashboard clock read 2:41 a.m. "Hello?" I called again, louder this time. "State Police. If you can hear me, come out." Nothing. I stepped back and circled the car. The trunk was shut. The backseat was empty. The driver's side window was down, and a half-full bottle of water sat in the cup holder. The air inside was warm but not oppressive. Like the car had been running only a few minutes, I radioed it in. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I've got an abandoned vehicle out on 375 about a mile east of marker 88. Engines running. No sign of occupants. Over." The dispatcher, a woman named Carla who'd been on the job as long as I had, sounded puzzled. "Copy that, 47. We'll run the plates. Stand by." While I waited, I walked a slow circle with my flashlight, scanning the desert in every direction. The beam lit up clumps of sagebrush and dusty earth. The road stretched ahead, vanishing into the black. No footprints. No sign of anyone walking off. I leaned into the open driver's side door and checked the gear shift again. Definitely in park. The fuel gauge was about 3/4 full. The driver's phone sat on the passenger seat, screen dark, no case. Carla came back over the radio. 47, the plate comes back to a David Hansen 34 out of Tonopah. No priors, vehicles not reported stolen. Want me to contact next of kin? Not yet, I replied. I'll have a look around first. I decided to search the area on foot. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped off the road onto the sandy shoulder. The desert at night is strange. Quiet enough that your own breathing sounds too loud. I followed a faint trail of disturbed sand, leading a few feet from the car, but it disappeared after a few steps. Out there, the wind can erase tracks in minutes. After 10 minutes of scanning in every direction, I came back to the Camry. That's when I noticed something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The driver's seat was still warm. I'd checked it earlier with my hand when I first looked inside. It had felt normal, maybe slightly cool, but now it was definitely warm, like someone had just been sitting there a minute ago. I remember looking around at the empty road, then at the desert stretching away into the night. I can't explain it, but I suddenly felt exposed, as if I wasn't alone out there. I turned off the engine to preserve the battery and left the hazard lights flashing. I kept my flashlight out, scanning the brush. Another 10 minutes passed. I was about to call in a tow truck when I heard something. A voice. It was faint, but I'm sure I heard it. A man's voice calling out somewhere in the dark. Help. Over here. I froze, straining my ears. Hello? I shouted back. This is Highway Patrol. Call out again! The voice didn't answer. I swung the flashlight in the direction I thought I'd heard it, north toward a cluster of low desert shrubs. I stepped off the road again, boots crunching in the dry sand. The sound came again, even fainter. Help, please. I kept moving toward it, the beam of my light bobbing across the uneven ground. The further I went, the more the road behind me seemed to shrink into a thin strip of light. I stopped when I reached a shallow depression in the sand, a dry wash that probably carried water during flash floods. I swept the light across it. No one was there. That's when the voice came again, closer this time. But it didn't come from the desert. It came from the direction of the car. I felt my stomach twist as I turned back. The Camry was still sitting there on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking in the dark. The voice, soft, hoarse, but definitely a man's, seemed to be coming from right beside it. I hurried back, my boots kicking up dust. Hello? I shouted again. If you're injured, show yourself. I reached the car and shone my light inside. Empty. The voice stopped. I stood there for a long moment, breathing hard, listening to the silence. Then I climbed into the driver's seat, half expecting to find someone crouched in the back seat or under the dash. But there was nothing. The seat was still warm. I turned to look at the passenger seat. That's when I noticed the phone screen had lit up on its own. A faint blue glow illuminated the inside of the car. A single notification was on the screen. A text message. It read, "Don't follow me." I swear to this day I hadn't touched the phone. I picked it up intending to scroll through the messages, but as soon as I did, the screen went black. The phone was dead, battery completely drained. That was enough for me. I radioed for a tow truck and requested backup. By the time another unit arrived, about 40 minutes later, nothing else had happened. We searched the surrounding area for another hour, but there was no sign of the driver. No footprints, no personal belongings, nothing. The car was impounded and the phone was logged as evidence. The next morning, I called David Hansen's listed home phone. It went straight to voicemail. A missing persons report was filed later that day. As far as I know, Hansen has never been found. I've patrolled that stretch of 375 dozens of times since. Every time I pass mile marker 88, I feel that same uneasy chill, remembering the warm seat, the voice in the dark, and that message on the dead phone. Sometimes I wonder if the voice out in the desert that night was really asking for help, or warning me to stay away. Either way, I've never forgotten it. I don't usually post online about stuff like this, but I need to get it off my chest. I've worked as a night security guard for about 6 years now. I've had my share of weird nights. Raccoons setting off alarms, drunk trespassers trying to get inside. But nothing has ever stuck with me the way my time at the Houston Bayport shipping warehouse did. It started last fall. I just transferred to the Bayport site because it paid a little more. The warehouse was massive, about 3 football fields long with long rows of stacked shipping containers, loading docks on one side, and a fenced gravel lot that stretched out toward the highway. There was a small security office near the front gate, but most of my shift was spent doing rounds, walking the floor, checking doors, and making sure the floodlights stayed on at night. There were usually 2 of us on duty. My partner Mark had been at that warehouse for years. He was a quiet guy in his early 40s, drank too much coffee, always had a dip of tobacco in his cheek. We'd trade small talk for a few minutes during shift change, but he mostly kept to himself. The first night I worked alone was a Thursday. Mark had called in sick. It was one of those damp Texas nights, the air thick and heavy, the smell of rain still in the air. I started my rounds a little after 11 p.m. The warehouse floor was lit by those big industrial floodlights mounted up near the ceiling. They had a bluish-white glow that made everything look a little colder than it was. About halfway through my first round, I noticed something strange. The far left corner of the warehouse, the part near the loading bay that faced the lot, was dark. That wasn't supposed to happen. Those lights are on timers connected to the main panel in the security office. I walked over there thinking maybe a bulb had blown or a breaker had tripped. But when I got closer, I realized it wasn't a technical problem. The big toggle switch for the floodlights had been flipped down, as if someone had turned it off by hand. I didn't think much of it. I switched it back on, waited until the lights flickered to life, and finished my round. 10 minutes later, when I circled back that way, the corner was dark again. This time, I felt a chill. I checked the panel again. The switch was down. Nobody else was supposed to be in the building, and the security office door had been locked since I'd started my shift. I told myself maybe the breaker was loose or the timer was glitching. I flipped it back up and stood there for a few minutes, staring at the humming floodlights, waiting to see if they'd cut out again. They didn't. I moved on. I didn't mention it to Mark the next night, but the pattern kept repeating. Every few nights I'd find the lights in that same corner switched off. Always that same section, never any other. Sometimes it would happen 2 or 3 times a shift. Once I caught it happening less than 5 minutes after I'd just turned them back on. I started checking the whole area every time it happened. I walked the perimeter, checked behind the stacks of pallets, even peeked behind the racks. Nothing. The security footage never caught anyone near that corner either. All I'd see was the lights go out. 1 second they were on, the next the whole corner was swallowed in shadow. It was about 3 weeks in when things got worse. That night, Mark was on duty with me. I was relieved to have someone else there because I'd started to dread that corner. Around 2 a.m., the motion alarm in that same section pinged on the monitor in the security office. That almost never happens unless a truck pulls in late. Mark and I grabbed our flashlights and went to check it out. The lights in that corner were out again. We both stood there for a second, staring at the dark patch, the hum of the other floodlights filling the silence. Then Mark muttered something under his breath and went to the panel. Sure enough, the switch was down, he flipped it on, and the floodlights snapped back to life. Except this time for just a moment. I thought I saw someone standing between the stacks of crates about 30 feet away. A tall shape just there. But as soon as the light flooded the space, it was gone. I didn't say anything right then. I wasn't sure I'd seen anything at all. A few hours later, during my solo round, it happened again. I heard the click of the switch before I even saw the light go out. It was a distinct sound, a heavy mechanical thunk. I spun around and aimed my flashlight at the panel. The switch was down. I swear on my life I hadn't been more than 20 feet away. There was no one there. I turned the lights back on and stood there, frozen, just listening. That's when I heard it. Soft, deliberate footsteps on the concrete. Coming from deeper in the darkened corner, I shouted something like, "Who's there?" "This is private property." But my voice just echoed back at me. The footsteps stopped. I don't scare easy, but that night I walked back to the security office a little faster than I'd like to admit. After that, Mark started to notice it too. He was the kind of guy who didn't believe in ghosts or superstitions, but even he couldn't explain it. We checked the locks, the cameras, the wiring. We even swapped the breaker panel out one weekend. Didn't matter. That corner would always go dark at least once a night. Then came my last shift at Bayport. It was in early December. The whole place was quieter than usual because of the holidays. I was alone again that night doing my rounds. It was close to 3 a.m. when the lights in the corner went out, for the 4th time that shift. I stomped over to the panel, cursing under my breath, and flipped the switch back up. The floodlights blinked on, washing over the rows of stacked containers, and that's when I saw it again. A figure. It was standing between 2 crates about 30 feet away, exactly where I'd thought I'd seen it weeks before. This time, it didn't disappear. It was tall, maybe 6.5 feet, but horribly thin. Its skin, or what I could see of it, looked gray under the harsh warehouse lights. Its head tilted slightly to one side as if it was studying me. I froze. I wanted to radio for help, but I didn't dare take my eyes off it. Then the lights cut out. Not just the corner this time. All of them. The entire warehouse dropped into pitch darkness. I couldn't see a thing. I could only hear soft, steady footsteps approaching across the concrete floor. I backed away slowly, fumbling for my flashlight. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped it. The footsteps stopped again, somewhere just in front of me. I don't remember much after that. I bolted for the security office and locked the door behind me. I sat there in the glow of the monitor screens, clutching my flashlight like a weapon until sunrise. I quit the next day. When I went back a week later to pick up my final check, I asked Mark if he'd ever seen anything in that corner. He looked at me for a long time, then just said, "Some things in that place don't like the dark. Best to let 'em have the light." I've never worked night security again. I still dream about that warehouse sometimes. The sound of the switch clicking off, the hum of the floodlights dying, and the silence that follows before the footsteps start. If you ever take a night job in a big empty building and the lights won't stay on in one particular spot, quit before you find out why. I've worked the overnight shift at a small roadside diner in western Nebraska for almost 6 years. If you've ever driven through this part of the state, you know the kind of place I'm talking about. A long stretch of highway, 2 gas stations, a couple of motels, and our diner sitting under a flickering neon sign that reads "Open 24 hours. We get a lot of truckers, some drifters, and the occasional family passing through on a long road trip. By midnight, though, it's usually quiet. I actually like the graveyard shift. The hum of the soda machine, the soft buzz of the old TV in the corner, and the distant sound of the highway. It all feels strangely peaceful. That peace ended last winter. The night it happened, it was late January. One of those nights when the wind sounds like it's trying to rip the building apart. The roads were slick with ice and business had been dead all evening. By 2 a.m. it was just me behind the counter, Sam in the kitchen washing up, and an old man named Ron, one of our regulars, half dozing in a corner booth with his coffee. The bell over the door jingled, and I remember feeling a wave of cold air roll in. A man stepped inside, stamping the snow off his boots. He looked like a trucker, big guy, heavy flannel jacket, worn baseball cap pulled low. What caught my eye right away was how pale he looked. Not sickly exactly, just washed out like the color had been drained from him. "Coffee, ma'am," he said as he settled into a booth by the window. His voice was low, almost hoarse. I grabbed a mug, poured him a steaming cup, and walked it over. "Sure thing." "Long night?" I asked. He nodded, staring out at the dark highway. "Yeah, long road." I figured that was the end of the conversation. That's normal with truckers. Most of them just want their caffeine and quiet. But as I walked back behind the counter, I felt that weird prickling sensation at the back of my neck. Like I was being watched. I glanced back. He wasn't looking at me, still staring out the window. Something off. The diner was quiet except for the hum of the heater and the occasional gust rattling the windows. I busied myself wiping down the counter and stacking clean mugs. A few minutes later, I noticed something strange. The man hadn't touched his coffee. He just kept staring into the dark like he was waiting for something to appear out there. "Coffee's gonna get cold," I called out lightly. He didn't answer. Ron stirred in his booth, glanced over, then went back to staring at his phone. A half hour passed. The man still hadn't touched his drink. Then, out of nowhere, he turned his head toward me. "You ever see them out there?" he asked. I paused, cloth in hand. "See who?" His lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. "The ones that walk the road at night. They look like people. But they ain't." I tried to laugh it off. "You mean deer?" "We get a lot of them wandering near the highway." He shook his head slowly, eyes locked on mine. "No, not deer, they walk. But they don't blink." I didn't know what to say to that. Before I could come up with something, the bell over the door jingled again. I looked up, but the door didn't move. The man turned back to the window like nothing had happened. The disappearance by about 3:15, Ron finally got up, left a couple bucks on the table, and went home. Sam poked his head out of the kitchen. "Quiet night, huh?" "Yeah," I said, though I didn't really believe it anymore. At 3:30, the trucker stood up and came over to the counter. He still hadn't taken a single sip of his coffee. "How much do I owe you?" he asked. $2.75, I said automatically. He reached into his jacket pocket, frowned, and then patted his other pocket. "Guess I left my wallet in the cab. I'll settle up next time I pass through." I was too tired to argue, so I just nodded. "Drive safe out there." He gave me a look, not a smile exactly, more like a grim nod, and walked out into the icy night. I busied myself wiping down the counter again, but something kept nagging at me. Finally, I went over to his booth to clear the mug. The coffee was stone cold and the seat was dry. That's when I realized there had been no footprints in the snow on the floor around the booth. The security footage when my shift ended at dawn. I told Sam what had happened. He laughed it off, said I was just tired, but I couldn't shake it. So before leaving, I went into the tiny back office where we keep the security monitor. We have one camera over the door, another showing the counter, and one fixed on the row of booths. I scrolled back to the moment the bell had jingled. 2:02 a.m. The door opened. A blast of snow blew in. No one entered. My stomach sank. I fast-forwarded to the time when I'd carried the coffee to the booth. On the screen, I was walking across the floor with the mug in my hand, and I set it down at an empty table. The entire time the booth was empty, I kept watching. At 3:30, I saw myself talking to the empty space across the counter. I even nodded like I was listening to someone. Then the bell over the door jingled again and the door swung open by itself. The aftermath, I quit that job 2 weeks later. Sam thinks I just got burned out. I didn't tell him what I saw in the footage. I still drive by the diner sometimes. It's been months, but I can't bring myself to go inside. Every time I pass it late at night, I glance at the window booth where that trucker had been, or where I thought he'd been. Sometimes, I swear I see a pale figure sitting there, staring out at the highway. And every winter since then, whenever the wind picks up and the snow drifts over the road, I hear the faint jingle of that diner's bell in my head. I don't know what I served that night. I just know it wasn't a man. I've worked nights my whole life, but nothing ever rattled me the way those 2 months out in the West Texas oil fields did. My name's Greg. I'm 43 now, but back then I was 35. living in a tiny trailer outside Midland. I'd been laid off from a warehouse job and took the first decent-paying gig I could find, a night watchman for one of the smaller oil companies. The site was about 30 miles outside town, just flat desert scrub and rust-colored dirt as far as you could see. The company owned a handful of pump jacks, those big metal arms that nod up and down like drinking birds, scattered over a few square miles. During the day, maintenance crews came and went. At night, it was just me, a pickup truck, a floodlight at the central shack, and a whole lot of nothing. The guys who handed me the job said it was easy money. Just keep an eye on the equipment, the foreman told me. You'll be bored out of your mind. No one comes out here at night except coyotes. I believed him. I figured the desert was empty the way you want it to be. But I was wrong. The first night, my first shift started at 6 p.m. The sun dipped low, painting everything blood red. By the time I made my rounds in the truck, headlights sweeping across the endless dirt, the desert was already swallowing the last of the daylight. The pumps looked like dark silhouettes against the horizon, their metal heads dipping slowly as if bowing to something. I remember thinking it was almost hypnotic. I parked by the main shack and settled in with a thermos of coffee. The wind picked up as it usually does in the evenings out there, a constant low whistle through the fence wire. Around 2 a.m., I thought I saw someone. It was way out by Pump 3, maybe 200 yards from where I sat. A dark figure standing perfectly still as if watching me. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. The figure was gone. I told myself it was a trick of the shadows, the mind playing games in the dead quiet. I didn't even bother checking it out that night. Subtle things. A few nights later, I saw it again. This time it was near Pump 5, closer than before. Same deal. A lone figure just standing there. By the time I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the shack, it had disappeared. But there were footprints. I'll never forget that first time I bent down with my flashlight. The sand out there barely holds a print because of the wind, but these were clear. Bare feet. Not boots, not sneakers. Just long, narrow impressions, leading out into the open desert until they faded into nothing. That's when I started keeping the truck. Keys in my pocket. I told Danny about it. He was another guard who worked the opposite shift. He just laughed. Night plays tricks on you, he said. Wait till you've been out there a few weeks. You'll be seeing coyotes standing like men and tumbleweeds rolling uphill. He wasn't wrong about the night doing strange things to your head. But the footprints weren't in my head. The voices. By the third week, the strangeness started to feel personal. I'd park the truck by a pump to do a quick inspection, step out with my flashlight, and swear I heard someone calling my name from the dark. Not a shout, more like a whisper carried on the wind. One night I followed it, walking a little ways from the pump. I could hear the crunch of my own boots, and then, just behind me, the crunch of another set of footsteps. I spun around. The beam of my flashlight sliced through the dust and empty scrub. No one there. That was the first night I kept the cab doors locked. The third figure. It wasn't just me. One night, about a month in, Danny stayed late to go over some paperwork with me. We were standing by the shack, both leaning on the hood of the truck, when he froze and stared past my shoulder. "Greg," he said, his voice low. "There's someone out there." I turned. There it was again. That same distant figure, maybe 50 yards off this time, half hidden by the shadow of a pump jack. I was relieved he'd seen it too. We both grabbed flashlights and started toward it, moving quick, expecting some drifter or maybe a copper thief. It didn't move. But as we got closer, the figure sort of thinned out. I don't know how else to say it. One second it was there, the next it was gone, like heat rising off asphalt. We searched the area. Nothing. Just the empty desert and, again, a single set of bare footprints leading away from the pump. Danny was pale as a sheet. "Man, I'm not sticking around for this," he muttered. But he did. We both needed the paycheck, the climax. The night that broke me came just after midnight in late October. I was alone. The wind had died and the air felt unnaturally still, like the desert was holding its breath. I was out near Pump 7 when the truck headlights picked up not one, but 3 figures standing side by side. They were far enough away that I couldn't see faces, but close enough that I knew they were human-shaped. All 3 stood motionless, facing me. I sat frozen behind the wheel, my heart hammering. I flicked the high beams on. In that split second of bright light, they stepped forward. not walking, more like sliding a few inches. That was enough for me. I floored it, spun the truck around, and sped back to the shack. I radioed the foreman, trying to keep my voice steady. He said he'd send someone out in the morning. I didn't sleep at all the rest of the shift. I just sat there in the cab with the engine running, watching the dark. The final night, the company sent 2 guys out the next day. They looked at me like I was crazy, but they didn't find any footprints. I put in for a transfer that afternoon. My last shift was the next night. I kept thinking, just get through this one last night. I made my rounds early, checked each pump, everything quiet. I parked at the shack with the truck idling, headlights sweeping the field. Around 3 a.m., I heard the door of the shack creak open behind me. I turned, ready to tell Danny he was early. No one was there. I heard the crunch of footsteps in the sand coming from inside the shack. I don't remember getting into the truck, but I do remember the feeling of putting 20 miles between me and that field as fast as the pickup could go. I never went back. I quit the next morning and picked up a different job in town. The ending, it's been 8 years. I still drive past that stretch of desert sometimes. The pumps are gone now, the company pulled out. But every once in a while, at dusk, when the light hits the horizon just right, I swear I can see them out there. 3 faint shapes standing still in the sand watching the highway. I know what I saw, and I know I'll never work another night shift in the desert again. I don't know if anyone will believe me, but I need to get this off my chest. For 3 years, I worked as a night janitor in a 28-story office tower in downtown Dallas, Texas. It was a decent gig, quiet, steady pay. I liked the silence. No bosses hovering over me, no phones ringing. Just me, my mop, and the hum of the building's ventilation system. The building was old. It had been renovated in the late 90s, but you could still feel its age in the bones. The way the lights flickered sometimes, the faint smell of mildew in the stairwells. My shift was from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I usually worked with 2 other people, Mark, who handled the top floors, and Dana, who worked the lobby and ground level. I got the middle floors, 12 through 20. There was one thing about that building I never liked: the freight elevator. It was this big, slow, steel-doored monster tucked behind a heavy fire door near the back of the lobby. It creaked like it was sighing whenever it moved, and it smelled faintly of rust and wet concrete. Normally, we only used it to move trash bins and supply carts. Here's the thing, though. There was no basement. At least that's what the building's blueprint said. The lowest accessible floor was the lobby, ground level. The freight elevator panel had buttons for L, lobby, through 28, plus a small keyhole-locked switch marked B. I assumed that B meant basement, maybe a service level that had been sealed off during renovations. The building manager told us years ago, "There's nothing down there anymore. It's closed off." Don't worry about it, I didn't think much of it. Until last winter. The first night, it was a Tuesday in December, cold and windy outside. Mark had called in sick, so I had to cover some of his floors. By 3 a.m., I was exhausted and just wanted to get the last load of trash down to the dumpsters. I wheeled the heavy bin into the freight elevator, hit the L button, and leaned against the wall. The elevator rattled like usual as it began its slow descent. I remember yawning, watching the floor numbers tick down. 10. Then at 3:12 a.m. exactly, the elevator jolted. It didn't feel like a normal stop, more like it hesitated as if it had bumped into something. The indicator above the door didn't show L. It showed B. I frowned. I didn't touch the locked switch. The key wasn't even in it. The doors stayed closed for a few seconds. The hum of the elevator motor went silent, leaving me standing there with the trash bin, listening to nothing but my own breathing. I was about to press door open when, with a long, reluctant groan, the steel doors slid apart. It was pitch black beyond them. I mean completely black, no overhead fluorescence, no exit signs, no sound. The air that drifted in was colder than the lobby by at least 10 degrees, and it smelled faintly of damp concrete, like an unfinished parking garage after rain. I couldn't see more than a foot out of the elevator. My instincts screamed at me not to step out. I jabbed L again and the doors closed. Slowly, the elevator started rising, the hum coming back to life. By the time I reached the lobby, my shirt was damp with sweat despite the cold. I didn't tell Dana. I told myself it was a glitch, an old building, an old elevator. But I couldn't shake that smell. Wet concrete and something else, something faintly metallic. The pattern over. The next few nights I noticed something strange. Every time I took the freight elevator between 3:10 and 3:15 a.m., it stopped at B first. Never before 3:10, never after 3:15. Always at that exact window. I tried avoiding the elevator at that time, even rearranged my routine so I wouldn't be near it during those minutes. But one night I was running behind schedule. At 3:11 a.m. I had no choice. I had to take the trash down. Sure enough, the elevator ignored my command for L and went down to B. That night I noticed something new. The moment the doors creaked open, I thought I saw a sliver of light deep in the dark. A pale, sickly yellow, like an old bulb struggling to stay alive. And I heard something. It wasn't a clear sound, more like the faint scuff of movement, like someone dragging their foot on concrete. Slow, uneven. I froze. The trash bin's wheels squeaked when I shifted it back. The moment I hit the door close button, I felt a slight change in the air, like something had just stepped closer, but I still couldn't see anything. The doors closed. The elevator rose. I didn't breathe until I stepped out into the bright lobby. Telling Mark a few nights later, Mark was back on shift. We were sitting in the lobby during our break, sipping bad coffee from the vending machine. I finally brought it up. "Has the elevator ever taken you to the basement?" I asked. He looked up at me, frowning. "There's no basement." "I know, but it's been stopping there around 3:12. Doors open like there's something down there." Mark stared at me a little too long before laughing it off. "Man, that building's older than both of us. Probably a wiring glitch. Stop scaring yourself." But his laugh sounded forced. And I noticed that after that night, Mark started using the stairwell more often. Dana's experience a week later, Dana came into the break room looking pale. "You guys ever hear noises in the freight elevator?" she asked. I felt my stomach drop. "What kind of noises?" She hesitated. "Like humming," a man's voice, but real low, like he's talking to himself. I thought maybe it was one of you messing with me, but when I peeked in, the elevator was empty. And it was 3-something in the morning. I didn't say anything, but Mark looked at me and quickly changed the subject. That was when I knew it wasn't just in my head. The climax. The night everything came to a head was in mid-January. Dallas had been hit by an ice storm, and I was the only janitor who made it in. The whole building was dead quiet, the way it gets when the wind outside is howling against the windows. I was finishing up on the 15th floor when I realized I'd forgotten to take down the trash from the 12th. I glanced at my watch. 3:05 a.m. If I hurried, I'd make it before that cursed window of time. I loaded the trash bags onto the cart and rolled it toward the freight elevator. The hallway felt colder than usual. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a few flickering in that unnerving way they do. I reached the elevator and jabbed the button. The doors opened immediately, as if it had been waiting for me. I stepped in and pressed L. The elevator descended past 12. It was 10. Then it slowed. The indicator blinked. B, it was 3:12 a.m. The doors slid open. This time the sickly yellow light was clearer, like a single weak bulb swaying somewhere in the dark. And I swear I saw the outline of a corridor. Concrete walls, damp and unfinished, leading away from the elevator. I heard the sound again. The dragging shuffle. Closer. And then a voice. It was barely more than a whisper, but it echoed in that hollow space. "Come help." Stuck. I gripped the trash cart so tightly my knuckles hurt. The voice sounded wrong, like someone trying to sound human but missing the rhythm of normal speech. The words were spaced strangely, the tone flat. I was shaking, but some stupid, curious part of me leaned forward, trying to see further into the dark. That's when something moved into the light. It was low to the ground at first, then it rose slowly, like it was pulling itself upright. I couldn't make out details, just the impression of something tall with 2 long arms standing just beyond the reach of the elevator's dim interior light. I slammed the door close button. The doors began to shut, but they slowed halfway, like they were resisting. That thing shuffled forward, the dragging sound louder, faster. I jabbed the button again and again, heart hammering. At the very last second, the doors clanged shut. I felt a soft thud against the other side. Then silence. The elevator shot upward so fast I nearly lost my balance. When the doors opened to the lobby, I bolted out, leaving the trash cart behind. Aftermath: the next morning, I quit. I didn't even go back to pick up my last paycheck in person. I asked them to mail it. Dana quit a week later. Mark lasted another month before he left without explanation. As far as I know, that building's still standing. I sometimes drive by late at night and glance up at its dark windows. I wonder if the new janitors have noticed the elevator's little detour at 3:12 a.m. I never told anyone official. Who would believe me? That an elevator in a downtown office tower in Texas stops at a floor that shouldn't exist, and that something is waiting there in the dark? Even now, years later, if I'm in an elevator late at night and it slows unexpectedly, my stomach twists. I can almost smell that damp metallic air, and I can hear that flat, hollow voice in my head. Come help, stuck. I know better now. If the elevator ever stops on a floor that isn't supposed to be there, don't get out. I've worked the night shift at a lonely rest stop off Highway 287 in Texas for almost 6 years. People think it's boring, just coffee, vending machines, and the occasional trucker. But the truth is, the boredom is what keeps you sane. When things start to get interesting out here, it's never good. It was early spring last year when the weird stuff started happening. I was on shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., the dead hours when the highway thins out and the building feels like it's floating in the dark. It's just a squat concrete structure with fluorescent lights that hum constantly, a few bathrooms, and a little convenience counter where I sit behind a glass-paneled security door. Most nights I'd see a couple of truckers, maybe a family on a road trip pulling in to stretch their legs, but after midnight it's usually empty. That night it was just me, the low static of the radio, and the occasional sound of semis rushing past outside. Around 12:40 a.m., I heard it for the first time. 3 soft knocks on the glass door. Not loud, not urgent, just patient. I looked up from my phone and saw her. A young woman, maybe early 20s, standing just outside under the buzzing parking lot light. She was thin, with pale skin that looked almost chalky under the harsh light. She had long, straight black hair hanging in damp strands like she'd been caught in the rain. But it hadn't rained all week. She wore a faded denim jacket and jeans, no bag, no phone in her hand. She didn't wave or smile. Just stood there, staring at me through the glass with wide, unblinking eyes. I got up, figuring maybe her car had broken down. But the thing about our rest stop is the main doors stay locked at night. If someone needs help, they usually call out or wave. She just kept staring. I picked up the intercom and asked, "You okay out there?" Her mouth moved, but I couldn't hear a thing. I gestured to the side window where there's a little speaking panel. She didn't move closer, just kept mouthing something I couldn't make out. Then she turned slowly and walked toward the edge of the lot, disappearing into the shadows near the tree line. I waited, expecting her to come back or for a car to pull up. Nothing. The lot was empty. I even checked the security cameras. No car, no figure, just a patch of dark where the floodlights didn't reach. I told myself it was probably some hitchhiker passing through. Weird, sure, but not unheard of. Still, I felt unsettled the rest of the night. The next night, around the same time, 12:40 a.m., I heard it again. Knock. Knock, knock. I felt my stomach drop before I even looked up. And there she was. Same pale girl. Same damp hair. Same denim jacket. This time I didn't get up right away. I just stared back, hoping she'd say something or wave. She didn't. I tried the intercom again. "Do you need help? Do you want me to call someone?" She tilted her head like she didn't understand the question. Her lips moved again, slow and deliberate, but I still couldn't hear a sound. Then, just like before, she turned and drifted toward the lot's edge. Out of sight, I checked the cameras again. Same thing. She walked to the edge of the lot and then, gone. I even went outside with a flashlight, which I normally never do. I searched the bathrooms, the vending machine area, even behind the dumpsters. Nothing. I called my coworker Dave, who works the early morning shift. I told him what I'd seen. He just laughed and said, "Man, you're finally cracking from the night shift," but I wasn't cracking. I know what I saw. By the third night, I was already dreading 12:40 a.m. I kept glancing at the clock. When the minute hand slid past the half hour, my palms went damp, and right on cue, 3 soft knocks. I didn't even want to look up, but I did. She was there again, a little closer to the door this time, her face pale as paper against the dark. But something was different. Her hair was dry, and I swear her jacket looked cleaner, newer somehow, like it had just been washed. I forced myself to press the intercom button. "Who are you? What do you want?" She didn't speak. This time, though, she raised her hand and slowly tapped a finger against the glass, like a kid trying to get a fish's attention in an aquarium. Tap, 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 I couldn't explain it. But the way she did it sent chills crawling down my spine. It wasn't impatient or angry. It was almost curious. Then she mouthed those same silent words again. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped out from behind the counter. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear the buzz of the lights. I unlocked the outer door and stepped into the cool night air. "Ma'am, are you in trouble? Do you need help?" She stood perfectly still. Her eyes were fixed on mine. I swear they looked almost gray in the parking lot light. I took a single step forward and she turned and walked into the shadows again. I shined my light toward the tree line. The beam hit nothing but empty asphalt and blackness beyond. The fourth night I decided to get ahead of it. I asked Dave to stay late and keep me company until 1 a.m. He agreed, mostly because he thought I was being dramatic and wanted to prove I was imagining things. We sat at the counter drinking burnt coffee and watching the security feed. I kept telling him, "Just wait, she'll show up." At 12:40 on the dot, there was the knock. Both of us turned to the door. She was there. Dave muttered, "Jesus." Under his breath, I whispered, "You see her too, right?" "Yeah," he said. "That's weird." We both watched as she stood motionless under the buzzing light. Dave grabbed the intercom. "Hey, are you all right? You need a ride or something?" She didn't answer. Just raised her finger and tapped the glass again. Tap, tap, tap. Dave looked unsettled now. "That's creepy as hell," I said. "See? I told you." Then without warning, she stepped back into the shadows. Not a turn and walk this time. It was like she just stepped backward and was gone. We both ran to the monitor that covers the edge of the lot. Nothing. The cameras showed no one leaving, just that same dark patch of trees. Dave didn't laugh anymore after that. The next night, he refused to stay late. Said he had to get home to his wife. I can't blame him. I almost quit on the spot, but I needed the paycheck. Around 12:30, the air in the building felt heavier somehow. The hum of the lights seemed louder. Even the clock ticked like it was counting down. At 12:40, I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. I didn't move. I didn't look. I just sat there frozen, staring at the counter. The knocking came again. Louder. Knock, 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 and then, faintly through the glass, I finally heard her voice. Not clear, just a whisper that somehow carried, "Let me in." It was so soft I thought I'd imagined it. But the words felt cold, like they slid right into my chest. I stood up slowly and glanced at the door. She was inches from the glass now. Her palms pressed flat against it, her face close enough that I could see her breath fogging the glass. Her eyes looked different, no longer wide and curious. Now they were hollow, like there was nothing behind them. I took a step back. My hand shook on the intercom button. "Go," I said. "Just go." She tilted her head again, still pressing her hands to the glass, then she smiled. Not wide, just the faintest curl of her lips, and whispered again, "Let me in." I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. And then, like every other night, she turned and slipped back into the shadows. I haven't seen her in 2 months now. I still work the night shift, but I can't shake the feeling that one night soon I'll hear those 3 soft knocks again. Sometimes I wonder if I should have let her in. Other nights, I'm terrified that one night, I might. Because the thing that keeps me up now isn't the knocking, it's the thought that maybe she's not waiting outside anymore. Maybe one of these nights I'll hear the knock coming from behind me. I never used to believe in ghost stories. I'm the type of guy who laughs off the paranormal. But what happened during my time as a night shift security guard at Granton High still keeps me awake some nights. I don't tell this story often because it sounds like the kind of thing you'd hear in an internet horror thread, but it's real, at least as real as I can remember it. I started working the night shift at Granton High in 2018. The school is an old red brick building in a quiet Midwestern town, built in the late 1950s. Most nights were boring, just long, slow patrols through empty hallways, listening to the hum of the heating system and the creak of old pipes. There were 3 of us on the night crew: me, Carl, an older guy in his 50s who'd been there forever, and a younger guard named Eric who only worked weekends. My usual shift was 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Most of the time, I'd do a few rounds, then sit in the front office with the security monitors on. I liked the peace and quiet, but the gym always made me uneasy. Even during the day, it had this echo to it, like the sound never really died there. At night, when the lights were off, it felt like you were standing in a huge hollow cave. I'd always do a quick sweep in there, shine my flashlight around, lock the doors, and move on. For the first couple of months, everything was routine. Then one night in late October, I noticed something strange. It was a little after 2 a.m. I was sitting in the office, flipping through my phone when I caught something in the corner of my eye, a faint glow on one of the security monitors. The camera for the gym showed the lights were on. That was odd. I'd done my rounds at midnight, and the gym was definitely dark then. I figured maybe Carl had left them on by mistake before clocking out. I grabbed my flashlight, walked down the long hallway that led to the gym, and pushed open the heavy double doors. The lights were blazing. The overhead lamps hummed faintly, and then I heard it, the distinct squeak of sneakers sliding across the court. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. I stepped inside, scanning the shiny wooden floor. It was empty. The bleachers were folded up. The basketball racks were pushed against the wall. I stood there for a minute, listening. The squeak didn't come again. Finally, I shrugged it off. Maybe it had been the sound of the doors when I pushed them open. I flipped the light switches off and locked up. The next night, it happened again. Around 2:10 a.m., I saw that glow on the monitor. Gym lights. On this time, I felt a flicker of unease. The school had a decent alarm system. There was no way someone could get inside without tripping it. Still, I went down there, trying to tell myself it was just an electrical issue. When I opened the doors, I heard it again in that unmistakable squeak of sneakers, followed by the soft thump of a ball hitting the court. It was faint but real. "Who's in here?" I shouted. No response. I stepped farther in, sweeping my flashlight over the bleachers, the corners of the gym, even the rafters. Nothing. I checked the door that led to the locker rooms. It was locked. Eventually, I shut off the lights and left. But that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd interrupted something. By the third night, I was seriously unsettled. I asked Carl if he'd ever had weird stuff happen in the gym. He frowned like he didn't want to talk about it. "Sometimes the lights act up," he said finally. "And sometimes people say they hear noises. Kids sneaking in, probably." He didn't sound convinced. Eric, the weekend guy, laughed it off. "Man, you're just spooking yourself. Old buildings make sounds, but I'd heard that squeak." I knew the difference between an old pipe clanking and the sound of rubber soles on polished wood. On the fourth night, I decided to catch whoever or whatever and was messing with me. I stayed glued to the monitors after midnight. Sure enough, at exactly 2:03 a.m., the gym lights flickered on by themselves. My heart started pounding. This time, instead of marching straight down there, I decided to try something different. I grabbed the spare key to the maintenance room next to the gym, which had a small window overlooking the court. I crept down the hallway, moving as quietly as I could, and slipped into the maintenance room. I turned off my flashlight, crouched by the window, and peered out. The gym was fully lit, and there, near the free throw line, stood a boy. He couldn't have been more than 12 or 13. Skinny, with shaggy dark hair, he was dribbling a basketball slowly, methodically. The sound of the ball bouncing echoed in the gym. I froze. I hadn't seen anyone enter the building. I watched him for maybe 10 seconds. Then, as he went for a shot, the ball slipped from his hands and rolled toward the far wall. He turned to chase it, and vanished. Just gone. I don't remember how long I stayed crouched there, staring at the empty court. Eventually, I worked up the nerve to step out and check. The gym was empty. No ball, no footprints. But there was something else. On the center of the court, where the boy had been standing, was a faint, wet mark. It looked like the sole print of a sneaker. I called in sick the next night. When I came back for my next shift, Carl told me something that made my stomach twist. "Back in the early 90s, he said quietly, a kid died in that gym, hit his head on the floor during a game, bled out before they could get him to the hospital." He didn't say much more. I didn't press him. For the rest of that week, I avoided the gym as much as I could, but I still checked the monitors. And every night around 2 a.m., the lights flickered on. I stopped going down there. I told myself it wasn't my job to chase ghosts. But on my last night at Granton High, the night that made me quit, I had to. It was storming hard outside, thunder rattling the windows. The power in the east wing went out briefly and I went to check the breaker box. As I walked past the gym, I heard it again. Squeak, thump, squeak. I stopped. My mouth went dry. The lights were already on. The rain was hammering the roof. But beneath it, I could hear the faint bounce of a basketball. Something in me, call it duty, or maybe just morbid curiosity, pushed me to open the doors one last time. I stepped inside. There was no one on the court, but the ball was there. A real physical ball. It sat still for a second, then rolled slowly toward me, like someone had given it a gentle push. I didn't wait to see anything else. I turned and left. I didn't even bother to turn off the lights. I quit the next day. It's been 5 years since I worked at Granton High. Sometimes I drive past the school at night. From the road, you can see the big windows of the gym. Every time, I tell myself I won't look, but I always do. And almost every time, and no matter how late it is when the gym lights are on. I've been working nights at a little roadside motel in West Texas for almost 7 years now. We're not one of those chain places with a big neon sign, just a single-story strip of 20 rooms and a cracked asphalt parking lot. It sits right off Highway 90, about 10 miles from the nearest real town. Most of our guests are truckers who need a few hours of sleep or families passing through on their way to El Paso. I've seen some weird stuff over the years. People screaming at each other in the parking lot, drunk guys knocking on the wrong doors, even a rattlesnake slithering into the laundry room. But nothing ever got under my skin like what started happening about a year ago. It all centered around room 17. The first call. It was a Tuesday night in mid-September, the kind of night when the desert air gets cool and still. We only had 4 rooms rented out. I was sitting behind the counter scrolling on my phone when the desk phone rang. The line for the rooms has a specific tone, 3 short beeps, so I knew it wasn't an outside call. I glanced at the screen. It read room 17. I frowned. Room 17 had been locked and empty since a pipe burst in there the year before. We'd never gotten around to fixing the water damage because we don't get enough business to justify the cost. The room stayed shut, curtains drawn, mattress stripped bare. I answered anyway, figuring maybe it was a glitch. "Front desk," I said. For a few seconds there was just static, like faint wind through a radio. Then a voice, hoarse, ragged, whispered, "Help me, please." I sat up straighter. "Who is this?" I asked. "This is the front desk. Are you in the motel?" No answer. Just a few shaky breaths and then the line went dead. I figured some drunk had wandered in and picked up the old landline in there. We never bothered to disconnect it. I grabbed my flashlight, went out into the night, and walked the gravel path to room 17. The door was locked. I peeked through the narrow slit between the curtains. The room was dark, empty. No one inside. It happens again. I tried to shake it off, but 2 nights later it happened again around 2:15 in the morning. The same caller ID, room 17. This time the voice was a little louder but still sounded desperate, almost panicked. "They won't let me out." "Please, help," I said. "Who's in there?" "Stay calm, I'm coming." But as soon as I spoke, the line cut out. I ran straight there with my flashlight and the master key. When I opened the door, I was hit by that stale, mildewy smell of closed-up rooms. The mattress leaned against the wall. The carpet was bare, the lamp sat unplugged on the floor. No one. I checked the bathroom, even opened the closet. Nothing. I told myself it had to be some kind of prank, maybe a crossed line. I called the phone company in the morning, but they said the line to room 17 had been disconnected months ago. A coworker. Here's it. I didn't tell anyone at first, but the following weekend my coworker Melissa covered the night shift. When I came in the next evening, she was pale and jittery. "Hey," she said, "does the phone ever, ring from one of the closed rooms?" I felt my stomach sink. "You got a call from 17? I asked. She nodded slowly. Middle of the night. A woman's voice. She just kept saying, "They're coming back. I can't get out." Then she started screaming and it hung up. Melissa wouldn't cover nights after that. I couldn't blame her. The backstory. The thing about this motel is it's old. Been here since the late 60s. A lot of stories float around about it. Drug deals gone bad, runaway teens hiding out, that sort of thing. After the second or third call, I asked the owner, Mr. Lane, if anything had ever happened in room 17. He got real quiet and said, "Best not to dig too much into old business." Later, one of the housekeepers, Rosa, told me in a hushed voice that about 10 years ago, a woman stayed in that room with her young son. The kid was maybe 6. The man she was with, some boyfriend, got drunk one night, locked the kid in the bathroom, and things went bad. Rosa wouldn't give details, just said the cops were called and the woman and boy never came back. I couldn't find any news reports, but I didn't doubt something ugly happened there. The night I picked up twice. The worst night came in late October. We had a thunderstorm rolling through, rain hammering the windows, lightning lighting up the highway. The motel was almost empty except for one trucker in room 5. Around 3 a.m., the phone rang. Room 17. By then, my heart would start pounding just seeing that on the display. I picked up, trying to keep my voice steady. This time, the voice was different, softer, like a child's. "Please, my mom's hurt. He's coming back." I froze. I wanted to ask questions, but I just said, "Stay on the line, I'm coming." I grabbed the flashlight and the old brass key and hurried to the room. Rain blew sideways across the parking lot. I could see the door to 17 at the far end of the strip. The curtains were still drawn. As I reached for the knob, I heard the motel phone ringing again back at the front desk. I hesitated, then turned and sprinted back through the rain. I picked it up, breathless. "Front desk." And I swear to you, it was the same voice. "Please don't go in there. He's still here." The line went dead. The room. I stood there for a long time, phone in hand, trying to process what just happened. The call had come from room 17, while I was standing right outside that door. I finally worked up the nerve to go back. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air was damp and cold, colder than it had any right to be. My flashlight beam swept over the empty walls, the bare floor. The bathroom door was ajar. I pushed it open. The cracked tile floor was wet, but I couldn't tell if it was from a leak or just rain blowing in somehow. On the sink, there was a small, damp handprint. A child's. No one had been in that room for over a year. Aftermath, I locked the door and never went back in there alone again. I still worked the night shift, but Mr. Lane finally had the phone in room 17 ripped out completely. For a while, the calls stopped. Then last month, the phone rang again. I glanced at the display and my stomach turned to ice. No room number this time, just a string of zeros. When I answered, there was nothing, just the sound of faint, ragged breathing. I hung up and unplugged the phone. Ending I've thought about quitting, but jobs aren't easy to come by out here. I keep telling myself there's a rational explanation. Bad wiring, a prank, a crossed line. But sometimes in the early morning hours when the desert is quiet and the wind rattles the siding, I think about the voice, about that small, damp handprint on the sink. And I wonder if somewhere in that room somebody's still begging for help, and nobody came in time.